Not knowing how to use the microscope could be what's keeping you from having results like these.
Yes, we had increased biomass in 6 out of 8 lettuce trials and increased uniformity in 7 out of 8. We had increased phosphorus uptake in the tissue test. We've also seen that our fusarium has gone down with onions, which was done with an external independent agronomy.
If you're a UK farmer, you live in a reality of high input costs, low commodity prices, and little to no support from the government. On top of that, you have to be ready for what the changing weather throws at you. And to add insult to injury, soon you'll be responsible for your farm's net zero compliance. By now, you have heard everyone and their grandmothers talk about Johnson Su bioreactors and how they could be a way to solve or mitigate some of these issues. It sounds really easy. Pack some materials into a cage, forget about it for a year, coat some seeds, job done. Well, that depends. Gee's Fresh, who we're featuring in this video, are one of the largest suppliers of lettuce and other grocery aisle goods to Tesco here in the UK. And here's Shona again to fill you in on the scale of their operation.
Yeah, sure. So we are based in Cambridgeshire. We currently work on a farm of about 4,000 hectares, growing mostly salad crops, so celery, iceberg, gem. But we also do potatoes, onions, wheat, barley, maize for our the maize for our digester, some organic beetroot, and then we've got other farms across the UK in more sort of specialist products like radish, baby leaf salads, asparagus. We've got a mushroom farm, and then we've also got overseas as well. We've got our Spanish farms, farm in Senegal, Czech, and Poland. So we're sort of everywhere, doing a lot of different types of crop, but mostly what Henry and I work on is the salads based in Cambridgeshire.
To implement Johnson Su compost on their massive scale, Gee's had to overcome a number of challenges. They had to create standard operating procedures and quality management tools to be used at these 3 key stages. At all times, they used the microscope as their main quality control tool. Stage 1. Start with having a standard control process for making compost. They needed a system that can be standardized using materials they have access to. This is to ensure that when they achieved results they were after, they would have been able to replicate them. And so this was the first major variable that they had to control. Starting with standardizing the vessel to hold the decomposing materials, to tracking different combination of ingredients. Everything is recorded, tracked, and quality controlled with the microscope. Stage 2. Safely extract the biology. At this stage, Shona and Henry run into a problem that could have negated all of their efforts. There was a risk that the work would yield no results, or worse, negative results. Had that had happened, the management would have simply pulled the plug on the entire experiment and never returned to using this technique ever again. And the worst part was that they would have never known why. It would not be the fault of the compost or the biology. Fortunately, they monitored the extracting process with the microscope and discovered that the extractor they purchased damaged the microbes they spent so long to nurture. Once they discovered that, they simply adjusted the amount of airflow to 20% and were able to safely obtain the product they were after. That alone was worth thousands of pounds in labor, diesel, and equipment, which would have been simply lost to the experiment with no chance of a return. Stage 3. Reliable application technique. Here is another risk for losses of biology that is mitigated by the use of the microscope. Any of the pumps or flow pathways could have been hiding means of damaging the microbes, but a quick check of the extract before it gets loaded onto the machine and after it leaves the nozzle will give you a clear picture whether you need to make changes or you're safe to go. So after all that effort, what did they gain? I'll let Shona elaborate on the results, but what's remarkable is that they had a result in every trial and on every crop they tried it on.
Just onto general findings from our 2023 trials. We trialed it across most of our crop types, but iceberg seemed to be where we had the most effect. and yeah, 13.5% on average heavier and 10% more uniform. In terms of objectives for us, in terms of trials with salads, we actually aim for uniformity more than biomass, because we already hit the specifications for our biomass, and the uniformity is actually really key, because you can go through and put all of those lettuces into the same pack for the same customer, rather than having to pick the smaller ones for different customers. So we mostly focus on uniformity, and our theory was here that it was just giving a bit of a helping hand to the plants that needed it, whereas the bigger plants that didn't need much help just wouldn't put out the sort of communication that required the help. That's just completely theoretical, though. Excuse me. In terms of conclusions, yes, we had increased biomass in 6 out of 8 lettuce trials, and increased uniformity in 7 out of 8. We had increased phosphorus uptake in the tissue test. So we did SAP, tissue and biomass testing, and as part of the tissue testing, we did dry matter as well. So we could work out actually how much of each nutrient was in the field, and it seemed to increase phosphorus, which from our growth curves that we've created in previous years has been identified as really crucial for the starting stage, the first week or so of lettuce. So that was very promising. What this is referring to is we had a trial with Iceberg last year, where it was the same batch, same variety, the same area in the field, same planting date, planting quality. And I went down to go and have a look at the trial, and the Johnson Su application, the Johnson Su applied area was harvested. And so we spoke to the harvest team and said, why have you, just out of interest, why have you taken that specific patch? They didn't know that the trial was there, and they said, oh, this was ready 3 days earlier. So it's really sort of gratifying to know that it had such an effect, that the harvest team had gone in and chosen that specific area, believing that it was maybe a different batch or variety, but it was actually the only difference there was our application of Johnson Su, and that's not sort of quantified, but the visual assessments are really important to us, because it gets people on board who think, oh, it's a bit of a sort of muck and magic, which to an extent it is, but it gets people on board that it can actually do something. And then this year we've applied it on all of our potatoes, and we're just doing continued trials on other products. We've also seen that our fusarium has gone down with onions, which was done with an external independent agronomy firm.
Does this mean that they have now achieved all of their goals and they've got a bulletproof system? Well, no. And as Henry points out later in the video, they still have several years of trials ahead of them to work out all of the controls for all of the variables that they have identified. Once all these are under control, their system will be complete. What's worth saying, though, is that the microscope allowed them to implement some of these controls early in the development process, which reduced overall risk and increased confidence in their efforts. All that came from an investment in a single day of training. We've since trained 2 more of their managers in another part of their business, and we're happily hosting them again this year. But that's not all. We know that it will take your compost game to the next level. In fact, every person at the top of our compost leaderboard has learned to use the microscope, most of them with us, and some via Dr. Elaine's course, or both. So if you want to produce the best compost for your soil and crop, consider what these guys have done and sign up to our 1-day intensive course. Link is in the description. And if you'd like to watch the entire Zoom call, click on the screen here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, using being able to understand what we're brewing up and have some form of consistency has been really, really useful. Because we were just sort of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what would stick before. But at least we know now. We can identify if we've got a lively brew or if there's brews that we're not going to use. So definitely. would recommend.
Yeah, no, would also